I'm a teacher of biology, and I would like to start by appreciating the teacher who came before, that is Mr. Josephat Jomo, who was discussing something to do with science and technology. And I appreciate that those learners who listened to Mr. Jomo, they were able to get and they were able to learn a lot from whatever was discussed. This is a very wonderful session that the learners should be able to gather around so that they're able to capture something based on whatever is being discussed, especially on their various areas. So like today, I want to tackle something in biology, and that is classification 2. I know that in Form 1, we discussed something about classification 1, where we were introduced to classification, and we were told generally that in bio or in biology, we are dealing with the study of living organisms, and in living organisms, that is where we are studying about plants and animals. That is where we are studying about plants and animals. But since we are told we have got so millions of living organisms, and therefore for us to study them in a very better way, in a way that all of us were able to understand, we are able to analyze these living organisms, the better way on how to go about it is through classification. And by that alone, we are going to define what is classification, just the same way we were able to define it while we were in Form 1. And by just definition, I want to say that classification, all right, let me increase the font size so that all right, let me try to see so that I'm able to adjust that the learners can see. So classification we are being told in Form 1 that classification is the orderly arrangement of living organisms based on the similarities and based on the similarities in their natural characteristics. So that is how we were told to define classification in Form 1. So we are just doing a review of whatever we learned in Form 1 in terms of definition, where we were defining classification as the orderly arrangement of living organisms based on the similarities in their natural characteristics. So we are trying to classify these living organisms based on their natural characteristics. And based on that, I want to say that in the given history of living organisms, we were told that we have a scientist who carried out a research, and in the research, these people realized that we had almost 5 million organisms on the Earth's surface. These 5 million organisms on the Earth's surface, they were only able to discover, like 200 million, 2 million of them. About these 2 million of organisms, those are the ones that were discovered, and they were able to be named based on those natural characteristics. So on this classification, one of the scientists, or we can call it a scientist or a naturalist, by the name Carl von Linnaeus, The Calvin line was a scientist who came up with this topic or with this aspect of classification, or is the one who devised this topic of classification, whereby organisms were able to be classified into various groups so that we are able to study them in a better way. This was a Swedish person, but later on, because this person was initially known as Carl van Lijn, but due to the fact that these organisms during the process of classification, they were actually being given different groups, and there was a new way of naming these organisms, and for that case, even this person, the name changed from the Swedish name that was given, and the person was now referred to as the Carolus Linnaeus. This person was given a scientific name, and that's why now the person was changed from the Calvin line to Carolus Linnaeus. That was now the name that was later given in Latin. So this person told us, because in the old or in the early days, organisms were actually being classified, but these organisms, they were being classified because there were so many. These people say that organisms were being classified, but this classification in the early days, they were based on certain few things. Actually, they were not focusing much on the features of these organisms, but they were only focusing on the relations, the relationship between the organisms and to the man. How organisms are related to man, and that is what they were mostly focusing on. And based on that, those people in the early days, they were actually looking at some of the few criteria based on the classification of these organisms. They were looking at very simple criteria. Some of the simple criteria that these people were checking on during the classification in the early days, they were dealing with things to do with the size. They were checking at the size of these organisms. They were checking things to do with usefulness, the usefulness of these organisms. These people were checking something to do with harmfulness of these organisms. They were more on how these organisms are related to man. That is during the early days. So when these people realized that this could not give us a good classification of organisms, that is why this Swedish person by the name Carolus Linnaeus, he came up with a modern way on how the classification can be done in a better way, so that we are be able to study animals or these living organisms, I mean, in a very better way. And because of that, this person devised the modern way of classification. This person came up with the modern way of classification. Modern way of classification. So on this modern way of classification that was devised by this scientist by the name Carolus Linnaeus, I mean, this person were looking so many things, and his observations were based on the features of living organisms. So some of the features that these people were looking at, or this scientist was looking at, he was looking at aspect to do with the biological processes. This person was looking at the aspect to do with biochemical processes in living organisms. This person was looking at more on the atomical structure of living organisms. This person was looking at things to do with the embryological. This person was looking at something to do with embryological features of these organisms. So these are the things that this scientist by the name Carolus Linnaeus was basing his argument in, whereby he was able to study more on the features of living organisms rather than the relationship between the organisms and human or man. So on that case, this person, based on the features that this person was looking at, this person came up with what we call the groups in which these organisms can be placed. And on those groups, this person devised around 7 groups. This person devised around 7 groups of classification. And those 7 groups of classification, this person by the name Carl Linnaeus referred to them as taxonomic unit of classification. This person referred to them as the taxonomic units of classification. The taxonomic units of classification that this person came up with, that is, if I talk about the taxonomic units, I'm just referring to the groups to which these organisms were placed. These groups, there were 7 groups, and these 7 groups, we refer to them, you can call them groups. We have 7 groups, or somebody can refer to them as taxa. The taxa is now the biological term that is used to refer to the groups to which these organisms are placed. Taxa, if it is in plural, we call them taxa. If it is one group, then we call it taxon. If it is one group, we call it taxon. So we should be able to know how to write them when they are in singular form, and also how to write them when they are in plural form. So I'm referring to the 7 groups. These 7 groups are the groups that is going to help us in classifying these organisms based on their structural and physiological features of these organisms. So based on these taxonomic units of classification, so we should be able to know now the 7 taxonomic group, because this thing even we were taught in Form 1, and we were told that there were 7 of them, and the 7 taxonomic units of classifications that we have, one of them, we were starting from the higher ranking side to the lower ranking side, and that is from the higher end to the lower end in terms of classification. So we'll be starting from the higher ranking side, and the first taxon, or the first taxa among the groups that we have the one that is being referred to as the kingdom. We have the kingdom. After kingdom, it is followed by the phylum. Phylum, if it is one, because we should be able to know when we are referring to biological terms in singular and also in plural. So phylum, when it is one, in plural, we call it phyla. When it is in plural, we refer to it as phyla. That is in reference to animals. That is in reference to animals. But also, we can also check in case of, and in this one is, this one is in reference to plants. No, in reference to animals, sorry for that. In this one is in reference to animals. We refer to it as phylum. But in plants, we call it division. We call it division. So when you reach at a point whereby you're going to talk about classification under the second taxon, then instead in case of plants, we are going to refer to them as divisions. But in terms of animals, we are going to call them phyla. Then after that, we are going to have the other taxonomic unit of classification, and the other taxonomic unit of classification is referred to as class. Is referred to as class. After class, we go to the next one. They were further grouped into this, the 4th taxonomic unit. And the 4th taxonomic unit is referred to as family. The order, sorry, that one was a mistake. The order, after the class, we have order. Then after order, we have the family. After family, we have the genus. After genus, we have the last class, which is the species. So these are the 7 taxonomic units of classification that we learned in Form 1. So when you look at them, I've decided to put them from the higher ranking end to the lower ranking end. And when I'm talking about from the higher ranking end, I'm referring to a group where we have the largest number of organisms, that is the kingdom, to the lower end where we have the least number of organisms. But we were told that as you go down the groups, the number of organisms reduce, but the features are becoming more common. So this is one of the things that we learned in Form 1. But then, look at this. When we talk about this thing, because sometimes maybe there's a student somewhere who is watching and maybe might be thinking, how will I able to remember all these taxonomic units of classification? Therefore, in this case, we were able to come up with how the student can able to remember, or the learner is able to remember, the 7 taxonomic units of classification, that is starting from the kingdom to the species. So in this case, what are we supposed to do? I think maybe people have come up with different formulas, and maybe mine might be different from yours, but it is good that we learn, so that also we can also, maybe if you already know one, but also you can also know the new one. So I always start with kingdom. I always say kingdom. For this case, I always say, let it stand for Kenya. Let it stand for Kenya. Then P, let us stand here for the police. Then this one, let it be can. Then this one be only. This one to be fight. This one to be German. Then this one to be soldiers. This one to be soldiers. This one to be soldiers. So I know that there's so many ways on how we can do it, or maybe we have got different formulas, but this is the one that I have able to come up with. I know that there are other formulas, but this is the one that I've come up with, where we have the Kenya policy can only fight German soldiers. So this is the one that I've come up with, which is different maybe from the one that you know, but it's so good that always we learn each day. So this is the one maybe for those people, maybe they might not be having a formula on how maybe we can remember them. So we know that we're at the point where we have police, the police, we can stroke it with D, because P stands for the phylum, which is all about a classification under animals, but also it is always stroke with the division that stand for the plants. So that is how we always remember it on my side. So maybe that one will be able to know it. Then also we were also told, according to these 7 taxonomic units of classification, I want to insist on one thing that is very important, which we should be able to know as learners, that when you are dealing with the classification, it is always good, so that you be on the safe side, we should always start writing those biological terms. We should be able to write them, or we start writing them in capital letter. In case you are maybe a learner and maybe you want to answer maybe a particular concept regarding classification, it is always good that you start with capital letter, and that is where we always maybe miss a mark. So for this case, because we have the kingdom as the largest one, where most of the organisms are placed, though they don't share most of the similarities or most of the characteristics, but that is what was there, and that is why we are able to come up with some units downward, so that we are able to classify these organisms in a better way. So if somebody arrange this 7 taxonomic unit, because there's always one of the questions that is always being tested on how maybe you'll be able to write these taxonomic units. Maybe somebody can say that write these 7 taxonomic units in ascending order. In ascending order. In ascending order. When somebody says that you write these 7 taxonomic units in ascending order, in ascending means we are starting from the smallest to the largest, whereby the smallest here means the ones that bears the least number of organisms to the one that has the highest number of organisms. And that one means that we'll be starting all the way from the species to the kingdom. So for that case, you'll be able to revise it on the other way round. At the same time, you might be told to write it in a descending order. The descending order just simply means now we are starting from the one that is having the largest number of organisms to the one that is having the least number of organisms. So that is all the way from the kingdom to the species. So this is what we learned. But because this person was dealing with the classification, or this person by the name Carl Linnaeus is the one who came up with the topic of classification. This person told us very important thing while we were in Form 1, or maybe we were able to learn very important thing about classification while we were in Form 1, where we were being told that as you go down the group, the number of organisms that are there, they reduced in number, but they share the similar features. Now in this case, I want to narrow down to them the species before I look at the kingdom. There's something that I'm interested about the species, because one of the things that you are told in Form 1, just as a reminder, that you are told to define the term species. You are told to define the term species. Then the species, they are those key things that we are looking at when somebody is defining the term species. And for this case, if I want you to define the word species, we know that most of us, we can define it, but there is always very key words that we always check when defining the term species. We know that it is the group of organisms. These are the group of organisms with more common features which can freely and naturally interbreed. The key word here, they can freely. These are group of organisms that can freely and naturally interbreed to produce a fertile offspring. To produce a fertile offspring. These are very important things, because if you missed these keywords, to interbreed and to produce a fertile offspring, these are some of the key things that we always check while marking the definition of the species. So these organisms, they must freely and naturally interbreed to produce a fertile offspring. So those are the things that we are able to check while we are dealing with this kind of this kind of context, or this kind of concept that we are handling right now. Then for this case, those organisms that they can maybe mate, but the aspect that we are looking at, okay, the mating can take place, but they able to produce a fertile offspring. If the organisms are not able to produce a fertile offspring, therefore, this case we are maybe due to certain similarities that these organisms are sharing. Some of them, I want to give a very good example. We have organisms like, for instance, in the cat family, or in the cat-like animals, let me not call them cat family, in the cat-like animals, we have got this category of cat-like animals. We have first category, we have large cats, we have small cats. The next category, we have the large cats. Example of small cats we have here, we have domestic cat. We have domestic cats. The large cats include, we have lion, leopard, we have tiger, and maybe the rest, because I'm not able to list all of them, and the rest. These organisms, for instance, they can be from, maybe because of the shared characteristic, maybe somebody might think that because of the shared characteristics, these organisms will be able to meet, or to mate, I mean. But for this concept, sometimes maybe the mating can take place, yes, but will they able to produce a fertile offspring? If they are not able to produce a fertile offspring, therefore, we are going to say these organisms are not belonging to the same species. They might be having very similar characteristics in terms of structural and physiological features. But if they are not able to produce a fertile offspring, then for that case, we are not going to give them the same, we are not going to say that all of them belong to the same species. So let me move a bit to the next point. Why do we have to deal with the classification? Why do we have to deal with the classification? What are some of the importance of classification? Why some of the importance of classification? We learned in Form 1, just as a reminder, because I'm not able to, maybe I'm just here to remind on what we learned in Form 1 about the importance of classification. And some of the things that we were told about classification is that classification is important because of the following. One, if you do classification, we'll be able, importance of classification, importance of classification. One, because of the classification, we are able to orderly arrange organisms in a manner that is easily be studied. We are able to orderly arrange these organisms in a manner that we can easily study based on the amount of characteristics that we are able to see. That is one of the importance of classification that we learned in Form 1. Another important of classification that we learned in Form 1, we were told that in this process of classification, it is helping the scientist. It could be biologist. We can refer to them as scientists. It is helping the scientist to predict the characteristics of certain organisms, even if they may not be able to know these kind of organisms. You can able to tell certain characteristics of certain organisms, even if you may not be having the clue about maybe this particular organism. But because of what you are able to see on the structure, you'll be able to tell some of the characteristics of this particular organism. Another thing that we are being told about classification, if we do classification, we are able actually to come up with a common name that is going to be understood by all the scientists across the world. And if you are able to come up with a common name that is going to be understood by all the scientists across the world, that one means that we'll be able to do, or maybe we'll be able to enhance communication among the scientists across the world. Because if you have maybe, for instance, if you have to use maybe, because in classification we are being told about the scientific names. Those scientific names are given to organisms because these scientific names, they were universally accepted. This enhance communication among scientists across the world. Plus so many importance of classification. I may not be able to highlight all of them because these are some of the things that we learned in Form 1. And another area that we were told while we were in Form 1, that this person by the name Carl Linnaeus, this person by the name Carl Linnaeus, this person came up with the scientific naming of organisms. And in the scientific naming of organisms, we were told that in the scientific naming, this is where we give organisms two names. This is where we give the organisms two names, where this is where we give the scientific we are giving this organism scientific naming of organisms, where the first name is referred to as genus name. The first name that is given is supposed to be genus name, and the second name is supposed to be the species name. The second name is supposed to be the species name. This is something that we learned in Form 1, and I don't want to focus it much on it because I tend to believe that this is something that we've already covered in Form 1. In this scientific naming, we always know that there are those rules that must be obeyed while giving organism a scientific name. Whereby, for instance, I must just give an example. The scientific name, for instance, of a wolf. The scientific name of a wolf is Canis. The scientific name is Canis lupus. The Canis lupus. One of the things that we were told, that while you are writing scientific name of these organisms, we were told that in Form 1, that whatever we learned is that the genus name, that is for instance, the Canis here, the first letters here of a genus name must start in capital letter. The first letter must be written in uppercase. And if not written in uppercase, that is not a scientific name. Then it is followed by the other one, that is the species name. And the species name is supposed to be written in small letters. That is one of the rules that we were given in Form 1 that we should be obeying while writing this scientific name. The next thing that we should be able to obey while writing this scientific name is that when you write the two names, of course, it is the genus name followed by the species name. The two names must be underlined separately. If not underlined, then that is not a scientific name. That is well unwritten, like I've done the unwritten one on the whiteboard, as you can see. What about if the one that is typed? For the case of the typed one, what are we supposed to do? The typed one, they are supposed to also to be written and also at the same time underlined. But if it has to be printed, then it must be given italic format. It must be given the italic format, plus many other rules that we were told. Then for this case, let me now, because I was much on the species. Now in Form 3, if I have to narrow down now to Form 3, then in Form 3, we want to discuss something to do with the kingdoms. We want to do something to do with the kingdoms. That is exactly what is supposed to be covered in Form 3, where we are going to be more detailed on the kingdoms. We want to focus more on the kingdom. We want to focus more on the kingdoms. This kingdom, we are being told, generally in the early years, organisms were placed into two kingdoms, and that is Kingdom Plantae and Kingdom Animalia. They only came up with the two kingdoms initially, that is Kingdom Plantae and Kingdom Animalia. And that one means that organisms were either placed into the Kingdom Plantae and the Kingdom Animalia. But due to some of the features, these people were able to study more features, and they were able to tell there are those organisms that cannot either be classified under Kingdom Animalia, neither can you classify them under Kingdom Plantae. For instance, okay, let me say, after they have realized that they were not able to classify them into those two kingdoms, that is Kingdom Plantae and Kingdom Animalia, these people devised other three kingdoms so that all the organisms can be placed. So for that case, we have about 5 kingdoms of classification. And the first kingdom of classification is Kingdom Monera. Let me just list them first. We have the Kingdom Monera. The next kingdom of classification is Kingdom Proctoctista. Kingdom Proctoctista. The next kingdom of classification is Kingdom Fungi. The next kingdom of classification is Kingdom Plantae. Remember, the initial letters must be capital. The initial letters must be capital. Please let us observe that. The initial letters must be written in capital. So we have kingdom fungi. The next one is kingdom plantae. The next one is kingdom plantae. The last one is kingdom animalia. These are the kingdoms that we have, and please, we must correctly write the spelling, because in biology we are actually emphasizing on the spelling, so the spelling must be correct. So I've said initially that in the early days the organisms were placed into the first two kingdoms, that is either kingdom plantae or kingdom animalia. But due to the fact that these scientists, they were able to, once they study further some structural features of certain organisms, for instance, there's organisms called mushroom. This mushroom, initially when we had the two kingdoms, this mushroom, it has a feature that was similar, like that of a plant. At the same time, it has a feature that was also similar to that of an animal. So these people could not either place it under either kingdom plantae or kingdom animalia, because this mushroom is that is the forest mushroom that is growing. It is able to grow just like any plant. That one tells that maybe it could have been classified as a plant. But look at it. This organism that is called mushroom, this organism is not able to make its own food. And therefore, if it's not able to make its own food, all plants, they have chlorophyll, and therefore they should be able to make their own food. But this mushroom is not able to make their own, it's not able to make its own food. And therefore, it was neither hard, actually it was hard for those scientists to place it under kingdom plantae or animalia, because it depends on ready-made food, just like animal. And those are some of the reasons as to why that facilitated these people to come up with other kingdoms. And that is why now today in the modern classification we have these 5 kingdoms. That is kingdom Monera, kingdom Protoctista, kingdom fungi, kingdom plantae, and kingdom kingdom animalia. So I want to start with the first kingdom. Under each kingdom, you should be able to give an example of organism that is found in each kingdom. For instance, let me talk about kingdom Monera as the first one that I want to discuss. This kingdom Monera, one of the things, because we have to look at the features of organisms that are found in this kingdom. So this kingdom comprised mainly with bacteria. It is majorly composed with bacteria. This is the organism that is found in the kingdom Monera. But why did we have to place the bacteria to this kingdom called Monera? Because of certain features. For instance, we had got certain features of this organism that made these people to place them, placed bacteria to this kingdom called kingdom Monera. One, this bacteria is prokaryotic. They are prokaryotic. If somebody talks about an organism being prokaryotic, what does it mean? We are looking at the nuclear material. Okay, first the word karyon here. This word is a Greek word derived from the word karyon. This karyon means what? The karyon just simply means nucleus. The karyon just simply means nucleus, and therefore these people were focusing on the nucleus material of this organism. And this is what they realized. For us to call this organism as prokaryotic, these people, they were able to tell us that this prokaryotic just simply means the nuclear material, or the nucleic material of this organism is not membrane bound. Is not membrane bound. it is not enclosed in the membrane. It doesn't have a membrane that is closing the nucleus, and that is why they decided to call it a prokaryotic organism. Then, next thing that we need to talk about, apart from being prokaryotic, these organisms have very few organelles. They have very few organelles. And these few organelles that these organisms, because we learned about organelles in Form 1, and we have got so many organelles like mitochondrion, we have organelles like ribosomes and the rest. So we are being told that when you look at the features of this organism in the kingdom Monera, they have got few organelles. For instance, they are lacking mitochondrion, but these organelles are not well organized. They are not well organized. At the same time, these organelles, they are not membrane bound as well. These organelles, they are few, they are not membrane bound, and therefore, this is one of the features that made the bacteria to be placed under the kingdom Monera. Apart from the two features that we have other features like, apart from being prokaryotic and having few organelles, we are also being told that these organisms most, use the word most, are heterotrophic. Most are heterotrophic. Heterotrophic. What do I mean by the word being heterotrophic? When organism is said to be heterotrophic, what does it mean? This one just simply means these organisms are not able to make their own food. That is something that we learned in Form 1, that is under nutrition. These organisms are not able to make, some of them, not all. Most are heterotrophic, and therefore means they're not able to make their own food, and they depend on ready-made food. While others are autotrophic. All others are autotrophic. What does it mean by being autotrophic? When I talk about autotrophic, I just simply means these are organisms that are able to make their own food. They are able to make their own food from the use of simple organic material in the presence of light energy. Like plants, we always know that plants are able to make their own food, and in case they are able to make their own food, they are being referred to as autotrophic organisms. So those are some of the features that these organisms have. So most of them, the word most, so you can't come and say that all of them, they are autotrophic. If you say that they are autotrophic, you are very wrong, because not all of them are autotrophic. So we are being advised to use the word, in this case, because of certain features, we are being either advised to use the word most or some. Then again, another feature that is in this category of organism is that in this kingdom that is being referred to as the kingdom Monera, this kingdom Monera, they are unicellular. They are unicellular. And what does it mean when organisms is being referred to as unicellular? What it just simply means is that organisms which are unicellular, they are made up of one cell. They are being referred to as the single cell organism. So they are made up of one cell, So that is what it means. So majority of them, they are made up of one cell, and that is why they are being referred to as the unicellular organism. So what about the mode of movement? Because one of the characteristics of living organisms is about movement. How are these organisms able to move? So we are being told that majority of these organisms, because those are some of the features that these people are looking at, they were able to move. They have got some mode of movement because they are motile, and therefore they move by means of using a certain feature. I want to give a good example of bacteria. A bacteria is like the one that is causing, because bacteria are always causing diseases. So I can say that bacteria, a good example of bacteria is Vibrio. Vibrio is a bacteria. And if I have to be very specific, there's a bacteria that is called Vibrio cholerae. This Vibrio cholerae, this is a scientific name, and therefore we have to follow the rules. Vibrio cholerae is a bacteria that is causing cholera, and this bacteria, it is able to move. And if you look at it, the this bacteria, it's somehow looking like that. And if you look at this bacteria is having a part that is elongated from the other end. That part that is elongated from the end, we call it flagellum. Flagellum, if it is one. If there are many, we call it flagella. In plural, we refer to it as flagella. This is a structure that is used by this bacteria to move. So some of them move by use of flagella. Use flagella to move. Use flagella. Flagella to move. That is how this bacteria is able to move, by use of flagella. So most of them, they have got this flagella that they are using as the way of moving from one point to another. Then another one, because another characteristic apart from the movement and locomotion that we learned, we also learned about this characteristic of organism, and the characteristic of this organism, they talked about reproduction. How is this organism is able to produce? About reproduction, this organism is able to reproduce. This organism is able to produce by this organism is able to this organism is able to produce. This organism is able to produce by this organism is able to produce asexually. It has asexual reproduction. It has asexual reproduction, and this asexual reproduction, that is by binary fusion. By binary fusion. That is by binary fusion. That is how this organism is able to produce. And if I talk about binary fusion, it just simply means that the cell, if it is a single cell organism, it has the capability of splitting to form more cells. So they're always able to divide. That is cell division. And through division, that process is called, through that cell division, it is referred to as binary fusion. So those are some of the features of this organism that is found in the kingdom Monera. So they are also appearing in different forms. Some of them are having spiral form. Some of them are having rod, that is, they form in they somehow like a rod shape, and other many shape that we can talk about. So generally, one thing that you need to know, apart from whatever we've covered, because there are other kingdoms that we are supposed to be dealing with, maybe we'll be able to look at them later, but generally, I was just looking at the basic introduction of classification, that is in Form 3, which was more of the reference of what we did in Form 1, where we were able to define what is classification, and we were able to look at the 7 taxonomic units of classification, that is all the way from the kingdom to the species. When we were able to also to narrow down to the word species, and also to look at the scientific naming. So generally, if you look at these things that we've talked about, because they are more elaborated in more details, So in case maybe in our next class, if we'll be able to have another class, maybe another session, I'll be advising the learners so that we'll be able to check in a more detailed way about these other areas, that is kingdom Plantae, kingdom Animalia, kingdom Fungi, and other kingdoms. So I will advise the learners to always use this time. They learn something, instead of maybe roaming around, they can at least settle down to see what is taking place, because KUTV is one of the channels that is referred to as educative channel, and it is very important to learners. So the learners can make good use of it. Let us ensure that by the end of every session, you get something at the end of it. And for this case, I would like to say thank you for listening. I may not be able to continue for now, but thank you for listening for the few areas that we've captured. I'm hoping that you are able to learn something from the area, or you are able to remind yourself on certain things that you might have forgotten, and that was very important. And thank you so much, and I appreciate.